Thank you. Welcome, Watford Mayor Peter Taylor and MP Mr. Dean Russell. Thanks for coming and to address our Indian community's concerns, and what we would also like to know what you guys are doing, which is good. And thanks a lot for accepting in a very short notice. And also, mainly, I want to thank you both because, as you know, that we all know that you are from two different political parties, but you're coming onto a same platform and a common platform and doing this for us on in this need of hour. Thanks a lot for that, and it's much appreciated. We all noticed that. So just to start with, before going on to the interview, I would like to ask, how is your family coping up during this period, things like that. So let's start with Peter.
Thanks, Surikum. I was going to say my family are doing fine, but I can just hear my daughter crying on the landing outside the room that I'm in at the moment. I've got 3 children, and they are doing well. But I think they're all off school, and I've been doing some homeschooling myself a couple of mornings every week. I'm sure, like lots of people, juggling busy lives and family life can be a bit of a challenge. But they're well, and thank you for asking, Surikum. And I think the last time I saw you, I was in your house seeing your family as well. So really happy to be joining you this evening.
Perfect, great. Dean, please.
Yeah, same here. And Peter, if you want to go to your daughter for a few minutes,
I can hear my wife out there. It's okay. I'm quite happy to be in here.
So yeah, and echo my same comments to Surya and your family. It's been delightful visiting and meeting you all and being at the party as well. So really, same as everyone else. You know, we've been in lockdown the same. It's been very difficult not seeing family and so on. But I think overall, you know, it's great to have a supportive family, and that really gives you a boost, I think, during these difficult times. So that's been really really powerful. And I think, you know, from a family perspective, family bonds to me are so important. So there's obviously my wife and daughter here in Watford with me, but also other family elsewhere. So we do sort of weekly quizzes and all sorts to make sure we're all keeping in touch. And my daughter very much drives that, which is wonderful. So she creates a new quiz every week. So a burdening game show host, perhaps.
Cool. Okay, perfect. I mean, instead of wasting too much of time, because we've got only 60 minutes, so we will try to fire through all our questions as quick as possible. And I would request you both to keep your answers less than a minute or so, or maximum of 2 minutes, so that we can cover through most of the questions, if you could please. So the first question would be, before asking the questions, what we would like to know, what have you guys been doing in last few months of the lockdown, things like that, you know, in terms of Watford as a whole, what you guys have been doing, things like that. We would like to know as an MP and as our representative, and Peter being the mayor. So we would like to know what you guys have been doing. Shall we start with Dean? So.
Yeah. Sure, I'll keep it brief. Really, it's I say 24/7 job, but probably 18/7 to get some sleep. But it really is doing everything I can to champion Watford. Been working across party, so as Peter will no doubt share, you know, we've put everything to one side politically, and I will continue to anyway. The real focus has been on the hospital. So I've been working very closely with the hospital to make sure they had PPE. I've found sources of PPE where that isn't the case across Hertfordshire. Working with government, so raising concerns to ministers, regularly working with ministers to make sure we get a good deal, as it were. So, for example, the staff testing site at Watford General Hospital, I pushed very hard for that, and many, many other things. And also an awful lot of volunteering. So because we weren't physically in Parliament, I used the extra time I had in my own spare time to go and volunteer. So I do a weekly shift at Watford General Hospital. I also volunteer with local charities, One Vision being one of them. But a lot of it really is just trying to be the eyes and ears, feeding back to government and doing whatever I can to support us. So, for example, with New Hope, very much worked with them and the council and the team there to enable us to home many rough sleepers at Travelodge. And that very much came from the pressure that we all put on together. But I made the calls to the ministers to make that happen, and so much more. I'm sure we can delve into that in more detail. But it's really doing everything I can to fight for Watford at government level and also do what I can on the ground.
Right. Peter?
Yeah, I would agree with all of that Dean said. I think there has been really good cross-working between parties. As you said, Dean and I are from different parties, but that's not really the issue at the moment, and working with Dean and councillors and others from all 3 parties. I think in terms of what have I been doing the last 2 months, so initially my diary cleared because I was, normally I'm out and about meeting community groups, going to various events. Those all cleared, but then as now I've kind of a lot of Zoom meetings. The 4 key things really that happened over the last 2 months. The first was making sure we could support the most vulnerable. Dean mentioned the homeless or the volunteers, but making sure that's coordinated and effective as possible. The second thing was making sure residents had up-to-date information. So I've done lots of Facebook Lives. There's loads of forms that have formed. We got information to every household in Watford in early April. The third is making sure that our key services have functioned, so that people's bins, if you're a Watford resident, every bin's been collected every day that it should have been over the last 2 months, but our parks are clean, and all the rest of it, that our funeral and burial services and all of the rest of those key services are still operated, which has been a challenge. And the fourth key area has been supporting businesses, which I know we'll come on to, but making sure that the government schemes are processed really quickly and that we're working closely with businesses to make sure that they can adapt and thrive again, because Watford has been a success economically over the last 10 years, but we're very conscious that things are changing and we've got to be there working alongside businesses in the months ahead. So I'm sure there's lots more I could say, but I'll just leave it there for now.
Perfect, great, thanks. We understand most of the answers would always mimic what you guys have been doing, because we could see that both you guys have been doing a terrific job. You guys have been doing a really good job. So we can understand that most of the things what you do would be almost same. So we totally get that. Also, the next question which I want to ask you is that Watford has got the most coronavirus cases in the entire Hertfordshire, and specifically in the last few weeks. So what actions have you guys taken additionally to what is happening now so as to contain this? Shall we go with Peter first?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think we don't have the highest. Hertfordshire has a higher rate if looking at councils, but I mean, it's not, any death is heartbreaking, and I know that it's regrettable that we have had a high number of fatalities in Watford. I think the key thing is obviously working alongside our hospital. Dean and I have both been very proactive in that. The second thing is actually the care homes as well. There's been a large number of care home fatalities, sadly, in Watford. That situation is much improved from where it was 4 to 6 weeks ago. But what we did, contacted every single care home, spoke to them, made sure they had access to PPE, and that all of the health advice was being followed, and being very proactive on that. I think the key thing for all of us now is to take responsibility that we do still have to recognise that, I think the figure today was 77 deaths, that we still have to make sure that we are following the government advice, the NHS advice, to maintain social distancing, to avoid large gatherings, because I think it would be a bit too easy to think we're over all of it now, and we're certainly not. And what we want to make sure doesn't happen is we get a second spike.
Great. Thank you. Dean, if you could please.
I absolutely agree with Peter on all of that. The efforts that have been made, really, especially collaboratively, has been to really get that message out there, make sure that people are social distancing. I mean, my simplistic view of it is if you're not within 2 meters of someone and you're constantly washing your hands, then you've got a lower risk, but also people around you have got a lower risk as well. So it's constantly pushing that home. I think the other big focus as well for me has been to sort of stand up to government and say, look, can you help us where we can? So the homelessness situation was one example, just one of many, but that was one where actually having lots of rough sleepers on the streets, was immoral, but during the COVID crisis, but generally I would say anyway. But also the challenge with that is, they're at more risk, but also they would be putting other people at more risk. So that was one example where actually having that direct route to ministers makes a difference. But in addition to that, especially from the hospital perspective and for care homes and the care network more broadly, I've been working closely with Jim McManus, who's the Director of Public Health at Hertfordshire level, to ensure we had the PPE, but also with the team at Hertfordshire County Council to check in on what's happening with care homes. I had a call just recently with one of the big care home organisations that has several care homes in Watford, just to really sort of grill them on what's going on, why do they think the issues have happened, and where I've had individual concerns come up, I've been able to raise those both directly with the organisations, but also with government as needed. So it really is building just working alongside Peter and sort of raising concerns, but very much asking for answers as well. And I can come to this a bit later, but with the Health and Social Care Select Committee, it means I have a bit of a stronger voice on the health side of things, and so when I get to ask questions around that, I can people tend to listen, and there's been quite a few examples of that recently, and I can share those later.
Perfect. Peter, you have done on that, please? This particular thing? You've answered that question as well, right?
I have.
Great. Just a quick thing. Now, recently there has been a law which has been put across that everyone should be wearing a mask in the hospitals, but we find that many people have not been doing that. So is there any action which has been taken, or any proactive measures which has been taken to ensure that the spread is contained within the hospital arena?
Would you like me to cover that first? Would that be
yes,
helpful?
please, yeah.
So the rule around that isn't actually coming in until the 15th of June in terms of asking anybody who goes in. As I've been, with the volunteering I've been doing, I think this is my 8th or 9th week or something. And so depending on which ward you're in and depending what work you're doing requires different types of PPE. And I think that's where a lot of the concerns came in the early stages around changes of rules of PPE, where people were worried about what they had in supply. But at Watford General in particular, the PPE thankfully has never run out, although there's been concerns around it. But what it's meant is that in some wards, and I can talk from personal experience, some wards or corridors I've walked down with no PPE. In other instances, I've just had to wear a face mask and gloves. Other instances, say when I was bizarrely cleaning Zimmer frames on my hands and knees the other week, I had to wear a plastic gown as well. So there's different types of PPE. What the rules will identify or push in the next week or so is to get people to wear face coverings, which is different from wearing surgical masks. So there's still a global issue around accessing surgical PPE, and that's what we need to make sure we're protecting. But you can make your own face masks or face coverings, and that's really to stop you from spraying or getting droplets from you onto others. But the other massively important thing there is around droplets that you might have by touching things. The other part of that as well is around transport. So I've had meetings regularly. I've had several calls recently with West Midlands Trains, who run the franchise through Watford. I actually visited the site just the other day to look at their social distancing. And again, they're pushing for, and that will now be mandatory, face coverings on public transport as well. So that is coming in. It's not there yet. But in terms of the premise of that, it's not about surgical masks. It's very much about making sure that people are covering their own mouths to stop getting onto other people. And I actually, on the Social Care Select Committee, it was one of the things I asked Sir Patrick Vallance about just a couple of weeks ago in one of the select committees, and I raised the point to him, if he was in a queue in a supermarket, would he feel more comfortable that somebody was wearing a face covering versus somebody, or if everybody was or nobody was? And he gave a very on the fence answer. But so I've been pushing on that front for a while, actually, that I thought it'd make more sense. Sorry, it was a long answer, but that covers all the points, I think.
Perfect, Dean. Peter, you want to add anything?
Yeah, obviously I agree. And the important thing is to be guided by what the experts are telling us. And so increasingly saying face coverings are important. I think it's important that people don't try and buy surgical face masks because there's high demand on it. And actually the disposal of that, if people start throwing them in the street, that could potentially actually spread the virus. One of the things we're doing with Watford Together is, I think particularly for children, it can be quite kind of, well, for all of us, it can be a bit weird and a bit kind of unnerving. And so to try to kind of lessen the impact of it, we're going to have a competition and kind of make it a bit more fun and light-hearted thing where people can, who's got the best designed face covering. But as Dean rightly said, it's about preventing the spread of the virus. It doesn't mean that you can walk wherever you want and do whatever you feel like if you're wearing a face covering. But we will see more of those, I'm sure, being worn in the weeks ahead.
Thanks, Peter. Next question is from Brihat. Brihat, if you can ask both of them, it would be good.
Sure. Thank you. I think both of you have partly started answering what I'm going to ask, but every day we hear on BBC the government's briefing and new directives and new funding made available and so on. But we, say sitting on the floor in the town, we don't know what's happening at the county level, city level. How does this get devolved? How does the money flow? And what say you guys have as a mayor or MP to make sure that appropriate level of funding and other services become available to Watford? So it's more general question, more for us to understand how the mechanism works. So either of you can take it. There's no.
Yeah, shall I go first then? So a lot of the business support is basically Watford Council administers it. So the grants that were going to the hospitality, the leisure sector, the businesses with business rates of £51,000 or less, we were basically given a set of criteria and given a pot of money and told to allocate that when businesses applied. And we got that up and running really quickly, and we were the quickest council in Hertfordshire in terms of processing those and getting the money out. So millions has gone out to local businesses. There's now a new discretionary scheme to kind of pick up some of the businesses that have been missed out on the other schemes. And that's now up and running. It's been up and running, I think, for about just over a week. I can put the link maybe in the group chat so people can go on there and see that scheme. And again, we'll be processing those really quickly and making the funding available. So quite often, people might complain about the criteria and come to me and say it's really not fair, but actually we're bound by central government criteria, and we administer the schemes that they've established. But there are other things that we're doing. So, for example, I've set up a group listening to small and medium-sized businesses about how we can support them across the town. If anyone that's watching this would like to be part of that, if you email me, it's just themayor@watford.gov.uk. And there's quite a few things that have come out of that. So, for example, people are very keen that the council showcases, excellent local businesses we've got with some of our new developments. And there's lots of work going on in the town centre, so we can open that up successfully. But then right across the town, we'll need changes to road layouts, signage, sanitisers, all of that coming in. So we're being very proactive, working with our businesses. I got the first data from our local enterprise partnership I saw last week, and it kind of gave the figures across the county about the impact. And the impact is obviously, negative on all areas. But one of the crumbs of comfort was that Watford had the highest proportion of residents who were working from home compared to any part of Hertfordshire. We've seen the smallest increase in unemployment compared to any other. So I think it's a resilient town, and I think working in partnership with Dean, with the council, the county council, the local enterprise partnership and businesses, we're going to make sure that we adapt as quickly as we can so our businesses can start to grow again.
Absolutely. Do you want me to?
Yes, please.
Yeah, so absolutely, and Peter and I were on groups that, or very kindly I'm invited to groups like One Watford, which looks at what's happening across the town, and obviously there's the Chamber of Commerce and so on. But my role really is to almost act as a bridge where I can. The government's going to make its decisions where stuff goes, but what I do is try and be a bit of an irritant and just constantly remind them to think of Watford with everything that they do. So even to the point that when I walk through Parliament, quite often I get called Watford instead of Dean. So, hey Watford, how's it going? So even from some ministers. So because my job I see is just constantly fighting the cause this end and trying to help make sure we can funnel as much through to the council and to residents. Just to give you a sense of some of the numbers on that, there was I asked one of the team at the MCA, the team for the Minister for Health, for Housing and Local Government and Communities, recently, Robert Jemrick's team, and his special advisor came back with some stats, and he was saying that for Hertfordshire we've had, and this doesn't include furloughing money and so on, but £484 million have come through. For Watford, 51.8 million. I appreciate we want to make sure that the council gets more money, and I constantly sort of say that, can we get more coming through? But just things like business grants, 18 million have come through. But in terms of nationally, the figures are quite astounding. I won't go through them all, but if you look at the business interruption loan scheme, for example, there's been 45,000 of those granted, 8.92 billion pounds altogether. If you look at things like the self-employment income support, 2.5 million claims were submitted, and that's 7.2 billion pounds that have been granted. Bounce back loans, the value currently, I think it's 700,000 around that mark, have applied. 21.2 billion pounds have been offered through those loans. So there's lots of sort of money flying about, but to your point, where I think Peter and I have been trying to work, and also nationally, to try and make sure that comes to us locally. And some of those measures are per head, some of them are on other factors. So some of it you literally can't change because it's based on how many people are here. But in other instances, especially some of the charity funding, and where we've been trying to make sure money comes through on that, that's very much a case of sort of fighting the corner. So just today I had a WhatsApp message from a minister, I believe, who was saying that it was a minister for homelessness who's confirmed that we're getting one of the charities in Watford is going to get quite a big grant coming through. So there's lots of things like that, but it's just constantly sort of reminding people, don't forget Watford, I suppose. And that's thankfully so far, there's always going to be a need for more, there always will be, but I think so far we've been quite good at making sure that that's happening.
Thank you. Back to you, Surya.
Okay, great. Thanks. Okay, because of the COVID, many people are losing jobs and businesses are affected, things like that. So what is the plans to revive them? We know at the national level, we are looking at the news, things like that. Within Watford, what are the helps which you guys are providing in terms of jobs as well as the businesses? What kind of support system is there in place? And what are the initiatives which you guys have taken, please? One of you guys can start, and the second one can start immediately when the first one is done.
Yeah, shall I go first? I think I covered much of it in my last answer, Surikuma, but additional really to that, I would say, please do get in touch with me. There's lots of work going. So we've got a new managing director at Watford Council, Donna Nolan, and she's leading on the Watford Thrives, as we're calling it. We've got Watford Helps, Watford Together, but Watford Thrives, which is about how do we make sure that help businesses to adapt so that they can grow again. So if you take, I don't know, an example like taxis, people aren't going to be traveling by bus for the foreseeable future in the same numbers. So we need to make sure that our taxis are safe, that we help the taxis to have screens put in, that they have the sanitizer. And so the council are working really proactively with them on that. There's a big piece of work on the town centre so that can open and the people are able to do that safely, that the queuing's in place. I could go through lots of other things, mentoring, training and advice, working with the Chamber, Wenta and the Local Enterprise Partnership. So I think I see the council's role as working with businesses. We can't do everything because we are a district council and we haven't got the resources to do it all, but what we do have to do is help people to adapt. And so I know that every business is going to be operating differently in the future to how they operated before this. And I think that Watford in the past has been a very enterprising place and people are very flexible, and we've got to support you in that.
Okay, perfect.
Absolutely. And I think from the big things that the government's doing is to try and ensure that as we come out of this, we've got opportunities for businesses to start to operate again. So part of the premise of the sort of slow move out of lockdown is to enable businesses to start opening up again. So just recently I was chatting to the lady that runs in the town centre about shops opening up there. Similarly for businesses that non-essential shops are going to start to be opening again. The goal really at the start of this has been very much to ensure that people could safely either not work, i.e. be furloughed, or not operate in terms of the business loans and so on and grants, so that they could put their health first. And now it's a case, as we start to come out of the lockdown, we absolutely need to protect people's health. Absolutely paramount, but also we have to look after the health of the economy. And I think one of the challenges of this is how do you start to untangle this what actually in hindsight was quite a simple thing going into lockdown at the time, felt very complex and difficult, but actually untangling this as we come out of it is going to be even more challenging. And so that's why things like the furlough scheme has been extended, asking employers to take on a bit more of a contribution, but still enabling it to happen. Things like the bounce back loans and so on are all there effectively to ensure that as business can start to come back up again, that it's supported as it does that. And I know in Watford through the work that Peter's doing with and the work that the Chamber of Commerce and all of those groups are doing is really to enable that to happen in a successful way. The challenge is going to be, as much as I'd love to think we'll go back to a full form of normality after this, it won't be that case, sadly. And I think what we need to be prepared for is that there may be higher levels of unemployment. There will be businesses that perhaps fell through the cracks or perhaps couldn't survive even with the schemes that have been available. So that's going to require us to look again at skills, look at where roles could be created and how we can start directing people to new opportunities. So, by no means when lockdown fully ends will that mean the end of the impacts of COVID-19, and that's where I think as local leaders that's going to be really important for us to support those people and help direct them in the right way.
Thank you, Peter and Dean, for that. The next question would be, also there was a question which has been sent across the chat, which is just to share the data of how many people affected in Watford so far, constituency-wise as well as ward-wise. I understand Peter has shared the link. Thanks for that, Peter. And also, they want information that are we in shortage of any facilities in Watford General in particular, and how are we handling the, how are we handling to control the spread, and what are we shortage on ventilators, beds, etc. Are we in shortage of any medical equipments?
I can say from all the conversations I've had with the hospital in particular is that we've thankfully been in an okay place throughout. However, at times it's been stressful. So PPE, at one point I was phoning the hospital every day to check. One of the challenges on that, just as a broad, give you a broad sense of it, is that PPE traditionally has been delivered in the space of a week or 2 week or even a month's worth of quantities. During the real height of this, it was going down to 2 or 3 days worth. So there was a constant sort of anxiety: will we run out? And if we run out, will we get more in? And thankfully, that didn't ever happen. That there wasn't any. On the ventilator side of things, thankfully we're covered on that front, and similarly on the on staffing and so on. But it has been tough. Don't get me wrong, and the nurses and doctors have been amazing throughout this, all the whole of the NHS staff. I think the other aspect as well, though, has been the mental health and support of those staff, and that's where Watford Football Club and the council and all of us have really tried to come together to support them with the Raise charity and the Watford COVID charity work and so on, is to support them on that front. But there's never been that point. The one thing that did happen was the oxygen issue, which hit the headlines a few months ago, probably about a month or two ago. And with that, it was more about the capacity than it was that we ran out of oxygen. It was often reported that we'd somehow ran out of oxygen, but it wasn't. It was effectively a bit like if you turned a tap on too much, there's a risk it will leak. And what was happening, or break, and what was happening was they were getting to the edge of what the amount of oxygen that could flow through it, in my simple terms, this is how I put it. And so they had to get support to ensure it could have more capacity or more pressure going through, which happened within the space of a day or two. And it was actually the Secretary of State for Health who told me what was happening, because I was in direct contact with him on the day. But for a few hours, it was a bit hairy. I think we all felt that. I think when we didn't know exactly what was going on. But thankfully, that worked out okay. But generally speaking, we haven't had any major issues. But there's always a need to be wary, and always a need to keep an eye on what's happening everywhere.
Thank you, Peter.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't really add much to that. Dean's exactly right that there has been big pressure on the system. Thankfully, the numbers in the hospital and the pressure has subsided. The oxygen equipment has been upgraded, so there's not the same pressure on it, and it could withstand. Again, what we've got to be careful of and all take responsibility for is preventing us getting back to a situation where we've got hundreds of people admitted to Watford General with this virus. So for now, lots of work has gone on both in the NHS and in our care homes to make sure they've got the right PPE and the right equipment. And I'm not aware of any kind of concerns about supply or access to any of those. And also our voluntary groups and frontline workers, that they've all got the right PPE as well. So a heck of a lot of work's gone into it. And at least for now, the situation seems quite reassuringly, it seems to be going well.
Yeah. Perfect. Okay, great. So the next question would be how to stay positive and connected, Watford together. So what are the initiatives taken so that we can all stay together? Let's start.
Yeah, so there's lots happening. So if people go to the website watfordtogether.co.uk, on there is a heck of a lot of activities. So things from sports classes and exercise to competitions, photography competitions, a book reading, for example, that we're going to do. I was really conscious, I think Dean touched on it earlier, about mental health in particular. It's something that he cares deeply about. And all of the different groups I go to, be they business groups, voluntary groups, all of them are talking about the impact on people's mental health, that everyone has found this difficult, but for some people particularly so. And so again, on the Watford Together website, there's a whole section on wellness and well-being, and how people can access support if they need it. There's also a Facebook page, so if anyone watching just types in Watford Together into Facebook, they'll bring up that. And I think Watford has come together. There's been definitely a huge outpouring of generosity and kindness. The last week or so has been a little bit more strained at times, but I think overall, the town has responded really well and looked out for each other. So encourage people to get involved with that. And I think in the future, once we're hopefully past the worst of this, there'll be some really positive new partnerships that have formed over the last couple of months.
Sure. Thanks. Dean?
Absolutely agree with all of that. I mean, I think the way Watford has come together throughout this has been just phenomenal, actually. And I genuinely mean it, that I think we're, if not the number one, but definitely up in the top few towns across the whole of the UK that have really been a beacon to show how we can come together as a community. I think some of the big parts for me has been the interfaith, aspect of it. It's very rare that I go and do any volunteering without seeing everyone from everywhere, which is fabulous, from across Watford. And I mean that across political divides as well. I'm regularly out with people from all parties, including Peter. And I think the power of this really has been that it showed how important community was. However, I do think, obviously mental health is a big issue, and I think we're going to be suffering with challenges of that over coming months and years. I think it's going to have an impact on young people in particular, that we don't quite know what that will be. So that's one thing that's really important to look at. And these are things that I've been raising in the social health and social care select committee and the joint committee for human rights as well, about how do we tackle this. The other part as well, though, I think, is how do we look at things like loneliness again? So I wrote an article not so long ago where I was saying that loneliness should have no place to hide in modern society. And I think one of the odd things actually with coronavirus, given the fact that actually what it's done is separate us all, I do think it's lifted a bit more of a lid on loneliness within the community and society, in that where people are more likely to know the person down the road who needed some help and actually go and offer help now than they perhaps were to do so before, out of fear of perhaps offending them or just ignoring it. So I think there's been a sense of that community cohesion. What we now need to do, I think, as communities is really keep that moving forward. What we don't want is a sense of fatigue around doing the right thing and volunteering. And so really it's about keeping that moving forward. And I think, that's why this call is so great. And thank you again for organising it, so that we can all come together, even if we're not physically in the same room.
Perfect. Thank you. Great. The next question is, what have you guys done, or what as a community we need to do in terms of healthcare and social care? And joint community human rights. So shall we start with Dean? Quickly, if you can just finish within a minute or so, it would be good.
Yeah, sure. I'll be super quick. I think it's probably, if it's the committees, it's probably just to me anyway. So I'll be super quick. So I'm on the Health and Social Care Select Committee and Human Rights Joint Select Committee. What that means is that pretty much on a weekly basis, I get to ask questions to the key players at the very top of the coronavirus activity. So the Chief Medical Officer, the Chief Scientific Officer, the Secretary of State for Health. So, and what I do is raise issues that have come to me through people in Watford or through wider research. So I was one of the first to ask officially, and this is all on BBC usually, it's normally filmed live. So I was one of the first to ask Sir Patrick Vallance, who's the Chief Scientific Officer, about when will schools close. I was the one who asked him again recently about face coverings. In terms of mental health, I asked the Lord Chief Justice just a few weeks ago about the work that's required to ensure people with learning disabilities and autism are being looked after in mental health institutions, because there've been abuses there. So really the benefit to Watford of me being on it is that I get to ask questions directly, publicly, live, and quite often difficult questions to the key players. And I know behind the scenes that means that I have a bit more weight when I raise these issues more broadly as well. So that it does help give a certain strength to the questions I ask, and also the support that we get in Watford through that.
Thanks, Dean. Peter?
I think just leave it there, because Dean's on the Health and Social Care Committee. It's much more his area than mine.
Yeah. One thing I would say is that on my website, actually on deanrussel.co.uk, you can see most of the clips or the committee broadcasts. And so it's well worth, if you've got a specific issue or interest area, to look at those, because it isn't just me asking the questions. I'm sat with Jeremy Hunt, the former Health and former Foreign Secretary as well. And so it really is quite enlightening to get to hear direct from the front line. One other thing I would say on that, if you don't mind, just very briefly, I brought up mental health for families recently of staff at the hospital, and I made the point that shouldn't we surely, this was to the head of NHS mental health, or mental health at NHS, and I specifically said, could we look at how we support families of NHS workers? And she said they didn't do it at the time. I spoke to her a few days ago, and she said now across the whole of the UK, they've been working to ensure family members of NHS workers are getting additional support and information. So that was quite I was quite pleased at that, just as one example where I've made a difference, not just in Watford, but actually across the UK.
I will pass on to Brihat. Brihat, you can ask the other question, please.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, this is something probably is going to happen soon, which is we're going to slowly, remove the lockdown, and as a part of that, slowly leisure and recreation activities will open. As you know, Watford is quite a center of it for almost the county. And what measures are we going to have in place so that it doesn't escalate into like a second local peak, so to speak, and how it is done in a good manner?
So, Brihad, was that a general reopening of, say, the town centre, or was that leisure facilities in particular?
Oh, no, it is leisure, recreations, restaurants, nightclubs, gyms, So I know government will say when they should open, but the implementation is, is still local.
Yeah, shall I go first? I mean, there is a heck of a lot of work going on in that. So our environmental health team have been having dialogues with each business individually, offering them individual advice and support, and each business will have to adapt slightly differently. So leisure centres, for example, we anticipate that they'll start opening in July, working with Everyone Active, who operate Woodside and Watford Central. We're thinking about how you obviously ensure the sanitisers there, that it's safe to do that the machines in the gym are separated out, possibly moving them into different locations. Things like swimming, for example, that actually once you're in the pool, it's quite safe, but the problem is at the pool side with the showers. So there's lots and lots that's happening. I think the main thing to say is that people, you need to follow the NHS advice, be cautious, but we will be making sure that all of the systems are in place, that once these things are opening, it's safe to do that. So, for example, the town centre businesses already are adapting. So lots of restaurants have turned into takeaways, pubs that are offering a takeaway service as well. So that will happen. We're changing things like road layouts as well, signage, and working with our businesses to achieve that. So there's a lot of work going on. But if anyone has any individual problems, as ever, do email me, and I'm happy to take that up with the team. But they're very proactively going around every business in Watford to offer that support.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks, Brad. The next question would be, in terms of healthcare, GPs are not seeing the patient in person. And are we sitting on a time bomb of other poorly treated diseases and conditions, things like that? And in terms of hospital and PPE, which you have slightly covered before, what are the support you're doing? And also someone has asked that, I'm just getting questions across. So another question which I had was, people are not being forced to wear masks, because of which it is all covering either in hospitals or in outside local areas. How do you think that you can enforce it much more so that we are making sure that people are wearing a mask, things like that? So the main question is all about GPs are not seeing patient in person. When are they starting to do that? And also are we sitting on a time bomb for the poorly treated diseases?
So shall I cover that? I'll start. So on that, that's something we actually covered in the Health Select Committee quite recently, around what's the long-term rollout of this, or unpicking of this, especially for patients. And I speak on a weekly basis with the local CCG who look after all the GP surgeries, and with various GP surgeries. It is a concern because you're going to have people who perhaps put off seeing their doctors in some instances, and so their issues may have got worse during this time. One of the big messages throughout this is if somebody needed urgent medical attention, they should go to the hospital, speak to their GPs. GPs, from what I gather, have actually been busier than ever because they've been doing lots of virtual appointments. So that's very much been continuing, and I know they've been working incredibly hard. I think there's some learnings of this around things like virtual appointments, which I think over the coming weeks and months and years especially may become a bit more normal. I think some GPs have found that actually they can get through a lot more patients with virtual appointments. However, the catch is that the issue really is around elective surgeries, so people like hip replacements and things like that, which weren't life-threatening. But now, once we start to come out, people will start to go, well, I want mine now because you delayed it 3 months ago. But there's going to be a lot of people like that. So there's going to be a lot of work done, I believe, in terms of communications to ensure people do get those appointments rebooked. But I'm not going to pretend actually that it's going to be a really simple solution. I think it is going to be a challenge in terms of how we manage that. And I think there's going to need to be people appreciating the pressure that's going to be on hospitals and GPs, more so on hospitals around surgeries than anything, because there's only going to be so many people who can do those certain operations and those certain issues. But I know there's a lot of work going into planning for that and looking at that both at a local GP level, but also at a national level. And it's some of the points that we've raised in a lot of detail in the Health Committee. Just very briefly on the face masks, I think there's going to be, similar to the start of lockdown, a lot of people putting pressure and very much that classic British, giving people a disdained look if they're not following the rules with wearing the face coverings. I know from a transport perspective, there's very much a focus on saying that you can't get on the train or get through the barriers if you're not wearing a face covering, and it will be similar in the hospital. And at the moment, the hospital isn't allowing visitors in at all, and that's been very well managed. I think that will be the same moving forward.
Okay, thanks. Peter, do you want to add anything?
Just the only thing I would add on the enforcement is, for example, in the town centre, there'll be a number of marshals operating. So the marshals that normally operate at Vicarage Road for football games, the same company will be marshalling the town centre from the 15th of June. So as the town centre businesses start to open, to make sure that people following things like the one-way systems that will be in place, the queuing, and we do need to take personal responsibility. I do think, sadly, the vast majority of people do that. You always get some people who think, oh, it's not going to affect me. I'm fine. I'm young and healthy. But what they don't kind of consider is that if they go home and give their mum or their gran a hug or whatever, that if they've been behaving in a risky way, that they can easily then infect a family member. So I think it's really important that everyone follows the rules, and as I say, we'll have extra marshals in the town centre along with the police to be enforcing that.
Perfect, great.
Could I add just one other point very briefly, if that's okay? Just around the other part, firstly, I need to give a shout out, and I'm sure we both would, to the police, because the police, I think, have been fabulous throughout this. They've been managing this in a really community-led way, and that's been wonderful. But the other part as well is that there's the test, track and trace approach as well. So there's a really important point as we start to come out of this, that people do get tested, and it's available to anyone over 5 and actually younger than that, hopefully soon. So the test, track and trace is going to be really key for people to know whether they've got this and whether they need to isolate. So along with all the other measures, that's going to be so important that people know that that's available. And that's totally, if you go to the .gov.uk website, you'll be able to find all the details of booking a test.
Perfect, thank you. Next we have
You're muted.
Yeah. So how are the social services functioning? I mean, I'm myself one of the trustees of Peace Hospice, so I know what they're going through. But in general, how are you and, as the mayor and MP, supporting various other charities who are, in difficult situations? There are piles of stuff outside some of the charities. They don't have anywhere to sort out. I mean, I'm not going to go through everything, but all sorts of charities are going through a difficult time.
Yeah, shall I start, Dean? You're completely right, Brihan, that the charities are struggling. So one of the things we've set up is the Watford COVID appeal, and that's raising money to go to local charities. So already that's raised, I think, about £150,000, including a very generous donation from Camelot. And so that's gone directly to people like the Watford Peace Hospice, New Hope, the Food Bank, all of these brilliant local charities. They've kind of seen a big increase in demand on their services, many of frontline charities, but at the same time lost a lot of their income because the Peace Hospices shops, for example, aren't open at the moment, which you'll well know. So making sure that they can compensate to some degree with that. I would just like to flag that in a little over 3 hours, our community auction comes to an end, and there's a portrait of Luther Blissett done by Dean Russel MP that's on that, and many other items on there, and that will raise, it looks like, over £4,000. Again, all of that money will go to local businesses. So I think there's been a lot of work done to try to support our charities. But you know, I don't underestimate the scale of the challenge that they face. But I think the town will pull together to support them as best we can.
Absolutely, and I agree with all of that. I think it's been great how the community has come together to support those charities. I'll show you a picture of my Luther Blissett painting.
There
if you can, I don't know how well you can see that on the. Oh no, it's not the greatest version that you can see on there, but let me take that off there. Oh no, it's not going to make a difference. But yeah, if you check out my Twitter feed, you'll see it. But hopefully that will raise some money today, and Luther's going to sign it. So any Watford football fans, please do bid. It all goes to a good cause. The serious bit of this is that, you know, charities have been massively affected, and working with Watford and Three Rivers Trust, that's been key. There's some really great local organisations that have been doing incredible work. So One Vision is one of them, Sewer Day. There's so many. I won't list them all because I'll forget one of them and get into trouble. But so many incredible organisations. But we do need to make sure that they're able to survive through this. The government has been setting up quite a few different funds, and literally tens, if not hundreds of millions have been going towards charities and supporting them. There's been a lot of work around domestic abuse charities as well. That's been really key, and also around homelessness. So hopefully that we'll hear some good news publicly in the next few days on that for one of the charities here. But it is a really big, important point. And, you know, just this week, I think it was on Friday morning, I did a coffee morning with Drum that was virtual, you know, who do incredible work, you know, and I know Electric Umbrella do brilliant work on the quiz that Peter does every week as well. So, you know, I think the main thing is just to offer support directly, and for all those people who volunteered during the COVID crisis to continue to volunteer for those charities as well.
Perfect. Can you hear me? Can you hear me, guys?
We can hear you.
Perfect, great. Okay. The next one is, I mean, you've answered a bit. There's a question which has been sent across. I've been hearing news that BAME, which is the Black community, ethnic group community, has been the most affected because of COVID. Have you guys done anything regarding that? This is a question from Manoj.
Yeah, shall I go first? So you're right that the stats do bear that out, and there's a number of possible factors affect that. The type of jobs that people do from BAME community might disproportionately be ones susceptible to it. Economic factors, there's lots of different, the fact that you might have multi-generational families living in one property. So there's lots of work going on to try to understand why that is. The council is doing lots. So first of all, making sure that every business and organisation has the right PPE. We talked about that a lot already. But also, I've set up a group. I met with the Watford and African Caribbean Association on Friday to think about what more can we do to support ethnic minorities in Watford, to make sure that every citizen is safe and healthy and can lead a successful life. So we have a really well connected town, and I think my role is to bring people together to hear what the issues are and then to take action when necessary. So there is work ongoing. Dean and I do it every Tuesday. We meet all the voluntary groups to talk about the issues that they're facing. So it is a concern, and you're right, Surikuma, that the stats do bear that out. And I know lots of work is going on to try to understand that and then to respond to the situation.
Perfect.
Absolutely. If I may just, sorry.
We've got only we've got another 5-6 minutes. We've got around 10 questions now. So we'll just go, one of you guys answer it if you don't mind. Next is the school, which is very important for us now. So do you, MP or mayor, has got any say on the school in terms of when the kids would be going in, things like that? Or it would be just a school by itself? Or what precautions do you think kids should be taking, or what precautions would you advise the school or the kids to make sure that they don't get a second round of COVID affected by them? These are the questions which have been put across now.
Do you want me to very briefly cover that, Peter? So yeah, so schools, obviously there's the government advice, there's the, I'll be super quick. You know, we've reopened certain schools or school years, early year settings in reception, year 1 and year 6 in primary schools, years 10 and 12 from the 15th of June. I think that the main thing really is just making sure that the schools are following the guidance that's been put out there. I've spoken to many of the local heads of the primary schools. I've spoken to several of the secondary schools, and really it's about just making sure we get the right approach in the settings. One thing that I think is really important to know is if you don't want to send your child into the school, no one will force you. You won't be fined. You know, so actually having less kids in the school is better because there's more space, but no parent is under any legal obligation at the moment to be forced to send their child to school if they don't feel comfortable. But a lot of evidence from places like Denmark, where they started opening schools earlier, has shown that actually it is safe, and a lot of the science around younger children with transmission, but more so in terms of catching this, shows that actually they're in the safest category. However, I get everyone's concerns, and that's why parents won't be fined to send them back. And schools have been doing an incredible job locally, a really incredible job to make sure schools are safe and prepared for kids to go back. And I think it's important to note that whilst some parents may not feel comfortable sending their kids back, there are parents who do want to send their kids back, and it's important for their development and their education as well.
Perfect. Thank you, Dean, on this. Peter, a question for you. Do you think that the schools, do you suggest them to start online classes for the school across Hertfordshire or within Watford? Is there anything anyone can answer?
Yeah, so it's very much school by school. I know that some schools are definitely already doing that. So Holywell in West Watford, the primary school there, does lots of online classes. My children's school, they go to Sacred Heart in Bushy. They have, you know, kind of given work to print off and do every day. As Dean said, the schools have been doing phenomenal work supporting their pupils over the last 2 months. And I think I was a teacher before this role. I think teachers and parents and pupils all want to get back to school, but obviously make sure that that's done safely. So it is a school by school decision. I suspect that in September, hopefully, if things go well, that we'll see a much more large-scale return to normality with schools opening again. But we'll have to wait and see the figures on the coronavirus over the next few weeks before that we know that for sure.
Perfect. Thank you. Would the local business be asked to demonstrate compliance or guidelines when they open after post-COVID?
Yes, they will.
Okay.
So there's lots of work going. So they've still got to finish. The environmental health teams will still be going out, making sure that they, you know. So for example, the pub at the end of my road opened a few weeks ago. There were 500 people on Watford Heath, no social distancing, no access to toilets, and so the police visited, and that was closed until they can open safely. So we want our businesses to open, but they need to do that when they're able to do that safely. So they will need to comply with the rules.
Dean, do you want to add anything onto it?
I completely agree. You know, health and safety is key, not just for the customers, but for the staff as well. So that's been absolutely paramount throughout.
Okay, next question is council services. I think it's more to do with Peter. If Dean can also add parking, opening of town centres, finances, things like that. Not more than 2 minutes, please. We've got 5 questions left.
So I'll just quickly say, we have talked about the town centre a lot. So parking, which comes up a heck of a lot in Watford, from the 15th of June, because I think 15th of June will be an important date. Lots of shops will be opening again, non-essential shops. The reason that most of these controlled parking zones were introduced in the first place was to help residents park on their own road, which the spaces would be lost by people working or visiting businesses. So from the 15th of June, we'll be enforcing more of our resident parking schemes. It'll be from 8:30 in the morning until 6:30 p.m. So not right through till 10 p.m. because in the evenings we won't have our cinema and theatres open, restaurants in the same way. But during the day, the residents parking schemes will be enforced. There also will be charges again at the town centre car park and at the Avenue car park here in the town centre. So we've done a gradual process. Obviously, we suspended lots of the parking enforcement during lockdown because lots of people were working from home and it was difficult for key workers in particular. One final thing on parking: if you're an NHS worker, the NHS do have a scheme where you can get a permit in order to park in residential streets and not receive a charge, and obviously we'll be respecting that and encouraging NHS workers to make use of that scheme. But that's all I want to say on that, Sarika.
Perfect, thank you. Dean, this is a question for you. I think the housing market has come to a halt recently because of the COVID. No buying and selling is happening. Do you think there would be any kind of relaxation on the rules, or would you be fighting for that? For example, stamp duty holiday, things like that, just to keep the housing market back on track. Do you think, what's your take on it as well as the government take on it?
I know estate agents have been allowed to open again, so house showings, and I know that caused some controversy because people were complaining that why can you take an estate agent into my house but I can't bring a family member. So that's definitely started to happen. I mean, the goal, really, the government goal is very much to try and get the economy working and running again. I know that the housing market will have stalled because of the fact that people couldn't move for the past few weeks, but I know people who have started to start that process again. So I have no doubt that will start to ramp up in the coming months. But again, it's like everything, we just got to do it safely. But people who wanted to move will be able to. And just similar with lots of things like weddings and so on within churches, the goal is to get people so that they can start to have these big life moments again, but we've just got to do it in a safe way.
Perfect, thank you. Quickly, do you think that there will be, Peter, that might be for you, do you think there will be any lowering of council tax or council tax holiday or freeze or anything like that is coming up?
So there is a scheme that means that anyone who's on a low income doesn't pay any council tax at all, and we've expanded that scheme. So again, on the comments, I'll add the link. So anyone who's on a low income, the council, like everyone else, is facing big financial challenges. So we've received just under £1 million from central government. The impact will be at least £3 million in terms of lost income and increased expenditure on things such as homelessness. So we do face financial challenges like most organisations and businesses. So I don't think we'll be able to cut council tax for everybody. But as I say, people on low incomes will receive, don't have to pay council tax. And I'll put the link to that on the comments.
Perfect. How about the green bin charges?
So the green bin charges have been delayed. Obviously, it wasn't the right time to introduce that. Initially, the plan would have been for them to be introduced in July. It's now going to be introduced in September. Of course, people will still get 2 bins collected every week. They'll get their food, a new weekly food collection, recycling, fortnightly general waste, and fortnightly garden waste, but charge is pretty much the same that they have in Three Rivers. Operates really well there. But that's been delayed and it's going to be introduced in September now. Seem to have lost you, Siriku.
Yes.
Perfect. And the next question is for Dean, lobbying of IR35.
Oh gosh, we could probably have a whole hour on that, couldn't we? Thanks to you, Saria, I hear the words IR35 on a daily basis almost. I've been lobbying very hard on this, and I was quite pleased that recently when Jesse Norman, who's the minister in charge of that, when he was talking at the dispatch box recently, when there was possibly going to be a vote on it, he actually mentioned me specifically as one of the 3 MPs that have really been lobbying hard on IR35. For me, it was a real win to get the year pause on the decision. I appreciate a lot of people would have preferred that to get rid of it altogether, but I can have a much longer conversation and perhaps we have a session on that. But I was pleased that Jesse, I've spoken to him several times on this, and prior to that vote, I really pushed, or what would have been a vote, I really pushed hard to make sure that we had this 1-year pause. So hopefully that's at least some respite for people and took a bit of stress off this year due to COVID.
Okay, perfect. We are almost 2 minutes delayed, but last final question, how we can help vulnerable people in Watford or general people in Watford as a whole, how we can help each other. So I want the answers from both of you guys, please, if you can.
Yeah, very quickly, there's been brilliant work by so many charities. Dean's mentioned Save a Day, One Vision, Salvation Army. If people go to Watford Council's website, so it's just watford.gov.uk/Watford Helps, and there's information there about all the support that's available for residents. And one group we haven't mentioned this evening are pharmacists, who've also been doing amazing work throughout this, providing really important frontline service. I think it's too often overlooked. So there's a heck of a lot of available from the voluntary sector, and all of the information's there online.
And same again, if I may say on pharmacists as well, I was quite pleased quite early on in this that I was lobbied quite understandably by pharmacists who felt they'd been left out. And Matt Hancock actually mentioned specifically at one of the daily briefings about pharmacists, because I'd been asking them to make sure that they got the same equal voice as everyone else. So I was pleased about that result and the work that's gone since. In terms of local community, exactly what Peter's just said, there's some amazing opportunities. I'll let you check out the Watford volunteering support that the council's putting out there. I won't send any others out to confuse things, but the main thing really is that there's I know within some communities it's very hard to ask for help and feels awkward to do so, but even if you don't feel like asking for help, even just going out and helping and organising deliveries, knocking on doors can be quite helpful for yourself as much as it is helping others. So even if you don't feel quite strong enough or feel comfortable, probably more realistically, asking for support, please know that actually you can still go out and help others and still get something back from it. So we're all in this, thrown into this together, and let's come out of it stronger because of it.
Perfect, thank you. I think we are there now. Thanks a lot, guys. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Dean, for taking our questions, and thanks for your support overall. And many people have said that, thanks, and they want to share your gratitude towards you. Thanks a lot. Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Thanks, Surya-Kumar. Thanks for organising it. It's been really good.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thanks to everyone who took the time out on a Sunday night to watch as well. So thank you, everyone.
Take care.
All right.
See you later. I'm going to have to dash, I'm afraid.
Perfect.
Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.